The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. Yeah!
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to pick the best VS pump for 2022. And it's kind of one of these things where the best is not really just one single item. And it's really unrealistic to pick one VS pump over the others. So I'm going to give you a rundown of all the VS pumps, and you can decide which one is the best based on how I'm going to describe each pump for you in this podcast. Pool Service Pro. Open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro. And I'll start by saying one of the key things that I always mention and I always tell anyone looking for a variable speed pump is to match that particular pump with your existing automated system. So for example, if you have a Jandy Aqualink system, you definitely want to go with a Jandy VS pump. If you have a Pentair Easy Touch and TeleTouch and a system made by Pentair, the Sun Touch, you want to go with a Pentair VS pump. And if you have a Hayward Aqualogic, you want to go with a Hayward VS pump, basically because they're going to match the automation. Communication between the pump and the automated system is going to be much cleaner and more fluid. And if you are looking for a pump that's not a brand of your automated system, I would discourage you and say you want to get the pump that goes with your system, because they're all really good, and you're going to hear that, of course, in this podcast. So that's the first thing I mentioned, is that you really don't want to get a pump that doesn't match your system. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to do that when they're all, again, pretty good. So here is kind of the rundown of the best VS pumps of 2022 and just about any year going forward, because they're always improving them and redesigning them. And so the models will stay the same, the model names, but they're going to definitely get better, or the model names will stay essentially the same. My go-to VS pump in the past has been the Pentair Superflow VS. I like this pump, and mainly because it was the first dual voltage VS pump that was on the market. Let me explain that. The dual voltage ability means that you can connect it whether you have a 115 or 230 power outlet, or the 110, 220. It's kind of weird when you talk about voltage. There's really no concise, I don't know if you're an electrician, you can correct me on this, but the industry always changes and you can read on different manuals. But I think most of them stick with the 115 volt and 230 volt as their baseline for the voltage. And so basically, if you have a pump set up with a single breaker, that's usually 115 volts, and if you have a double breaker, then that's a 230 volt breaker. And most 115 volt pumps are going to be 1 horsepower or less, and most of the 230 volt pumps are going to be 1.5 horsepower or greater. And this is kind of one of those things where a lot of older pools had just the 115 volt going to their equipment. So the dual voltage ability of the Pentair Superflow VS means that it didn't really matter what voltage was going to the system. It would automatically modulate that voltage. And I called Pentair one day on this, and I was talking to one of their technicians, and I asked him, so how does the Superflow VS modulate the voltage? And I was expecting some scientific answer, and he's like, I don't know, I have no idea. But since then, all the major manufacturers have gone to dual voltage VS pumps. You're going to have a hard time actually finding one that's probably not set up for dual voltage. And I think the advantage of this is that it gives you a lot more choices for variable speed pumps if you have a setup that's not 230 volt. Now, one thing to note, and I'll say this briefly, is that if you do put a 2.7 horsepower dual voltage VS pump on a 115 volt breaker, don't expect that pump to be 2.7 horsepower or 3 horsepower. It'll modulate the horsepower down to about 1.8, I believe, somewhere around there, or 1.7. So you're not going to get the full horsepower of that VS pump. So I wouldn't bother purchasing a 2.7 or 3 horsepower dual voltage pump to put on a 115 volt. It's not going to be logical because it's going to modulate that down. You might as well just get a 1.65 total horsepower or 1.85 total horsepower VS pump. And that's something that I failed to mention here. when I talk about the horsepower, I may not say total horsepower, but I may say it, but that's what they're actually rated for when you're running it at a lower speed. And I guess I should also mention that variable speed pumps are called that because they run at variable speeds and you can change the speed of that pump. So a standard single speed pump runs at 3450 RPMs and a VS pump on full would run at 3450 RPMs, and that would be the full horsepower that it's rated for running at that RPM. And with a variable speed pump, you can lower that down to 1800 RPMs or 2100 RPMs or anywhere where you want to lower it down to, which saves you a significant amount on your electricity bill, somewhere around 80 to 90% if you have it set up correctly. And this savings is really tremendous, and one reason why variable speed pumps are really popular. The other reason is that the Department of Energy mandates that you're going to have a energy efficient pump on your pool, and the 1.5 horsepower or above pumps, even some 1 horsepower pumps, are not rated for pool use anymore. And so variable speed pumps are going to be the way of the future. And so that's a long introduction to the Pentair Superflow VS, and I apologize for that, but I think that's important to cover. So the Pentair Superflow VS was my go-to variable speed pump because of the dual voltage ability. Plus, it was pretty easy to program and set up for the customers. The only drawback with that pump is that it didn't work with automation, so you couldn't connect it to an automated system. They've discontinued the Superflow VS, but don't be alarmed. They do have the new version of the Superflow VS, which is the VST, and this one does have the ability to communicate with automation, which is something that everyone wanted it to do. And so is the Pentair Superflow VST the best variable speed pump? Well, it just depends on what you're looking for your pool. It's a 1.5 total horsepower VS pump, so it would be suitable for most pool setups. And Pentair, of course, has a long history of making really reliable pumps. And a lot of the equipment in backyards in California, at least, are Pentair, so it's going to definitely match the equipment. But wait, Pentair does have 2 other variable speed pumps that are really good. They have a new WhisperFlow VST, and of course they have their tried and true, and probably the most reliable and their most popular VS pump with the pool pros at least would be the IntelliFlow, and they're in their 3rd version, so it's the IntelliFlow 3 VSF, and this one has all the bells and whistles. It has like a flow meter, and Pentair has made the IntelliFlow pump pretty bulletproof through the years. There was a little glitch last year, but since the inception of this pump, it was one of the first ones on the market, if not the first one. I believe back in 2007 when I first saw one of these out at one of my stops. It's something that's been refined over the years, so it's definitely the premier VS pump. I would say is the Cadillac of VS pumps. And this may or may not be part of your decision. And this is why I said to get the best VS pump for you. And there's a weighted energy factor, WEF, that all the VS pumps have to advertise with the pump. The higher the number, the more energy efficient that particular VS pump is. So the IntelliFlow is not the most energy efficient pump. It's a 3 horsepower, total horsepower VS pump. The Superflow VS is actually better. VST is actually a little better with the WEF rating. And I believe there are some other manufacturers that have a really good WEF rating. So that may be a factor for you if you wanted to maximize your energy savings. The WEF number is something to look at. The higher the number, the more efficient it is. The lower the number, the less energy efficient it is. But regardless, all of them pass the Department of Energy rating to be energy efficient, whether it's low or high on the WEF chart. So another factor in picking the best variable speed pump for you is how it fits into your equipment pad. And if you had a Pentair WhisperFlow single speed pump, it would be extremely logical to put in a WhisperFlow VST or the IntelliFlow pump because it'll fit into the same footprint as the old pump. Maybe even without replumbing anything, you would just take the unions off of your old WhisperFlow, and then you would simply install the new WhisperFlow VST or the IntelliFlow 3 in the same footprint. Same goes if you have a Hayward pump or Jandy pump. If you're replacing a single speed pump, contact them and find out which particular VS pump, or go to your local pool store or call your local pool pro that does installations, and he'll be able to locate the pool pump that's going to be easy to plumb in there, which means just taking the old one off the unions if everything is still intact and functioning, and putting the new variable speed pump on into those exact unions that he removed the other pump from. And so this factor may also limit your choices, because if you wanted an easy plumbing installation, you would go with a pump that's already there, where they have the VS pump made to replace that model. And so this is why I think you can't really pick one variable speed pump over all the rest out there in the field. You can't say that this pump is the best, because it's not best for you maybe, or for your client. And this is why I think it's important to make the distinction that these pumps are all really good. Some may be a little better than others with features, and you may like some for certain reasons. I'll touch on the Jandy pumps real quick, because I have 2 Jandy VS pumps in my backyard right now in my pool equipment. I like the Jandy pumps. I think they're really well made. They're quiet. They're extremely well tested. You're not going to have any kind of problems with a Jandy VS pump as far as I know, because they test them rigorously. They have various horsepower configurations. They have a 0.85, 1.65, 1.85, and a 2.7. This is the VS Flow Pro that they have. And they have various ways to connect it to a system that controls it. You have the JP-R, which is my least favorite controller, by the way. You have the IQ Pump 01, which I think is a great interface for your smartphone or device. Then they have a new Aqualink TCX, which is made for a pool to have automation for the pool itself, and not a pool spot combo, but just for a pool. And these are different ways to connect the VS pump to your system. So I have mine connected to the IQ Pump 01, which I really like, because it's a really nice interface and it's on your phone and you can do all the programming there, and something that if you're tech savvy you would like. But if you're an older client or an older person that doesn't really like using the phone for stuff like that, then you would want one with a standard controller. And a JEP-R would not be something I would recommend for someone who's not anywhere tech savvy, because that one's really hard to operate and to kind of go through the menus with. I'm really surprised that Jandy has not come out with just a simple programmable system for their pumps, because that's probably the main reason why a lot of pool pros shy away from them. They like the pump, but they don't like the interface controller with it. And to me, I think the VS pump with the best controller and the easiest to program and operate would be the Hayward VS pumps. Now, Hayward had a bad run of drives in the past, and they took a big hit with their reputation. You'd have drive failures left and right, and that was just because they had a bad batch of drives and kind of hurt their company, of course. Now, going forward, they have a new manufacturer for their drive. They offer a 5-year warranty, I think, on some of their pumps, just because they want to make sure that you feel confident that by buying a Hayward pump, you're going to get a good product. I would say that if you're leaning towards something with a control pad that you're not connecting to automation, Hayward would be the way to go. And my choice for Hayward would be the Jacuzzi branded pumps from Leslie's, the JVS, and they have the 1.65 horsepower, the 1.85, and a 2.7. The reason why I recommend the Jacuzzi JVS branded Hayward pumps is because you get extra warranty protection through Leslie's. Plus, if you're buying the pump as a pool pro at Leslie's, you'll get a discount on the Jacuzzi JVS, and that's their variable speed pump that's been branded for Leslie's by Hayward. And I think the controller, what I mentioned, that the controller is easy to use, is really easy to program that. And what I really like as a service pro is their quick clean button. You simply press that multiple times to increase the time that the pool is going to run. And of course, you can also program the RPM of that quick clean button. And I like that because sometimes you get to a pool and they've had a party, and you need to run the pool for 8 hours to really get things circulating. You shock the pool. So you just hit that quick clean button 8 times, and then you hit the right arrow key, and then that pool will run for 8 hours. So I like that feature because I really like setting the quick clean mode or the timeout mode in other systems, because when you're there, sometimes the system's running on low speed and you need to run on a higher speed to get the pool really cleaned and to get the chemicals balanced. I also like that it's really easy to check the program run times and the schedule in the menu. To me, it's the easiest interface on the back of the pump of any of the VS pumps. The IntelliFlow can be a little complicated. The SuperFlow is pretty easy and basic also. It's one of those things where, you're just going to have to pick and choose based on what you really want with the pump. I like a lot of features from one pump and I like features from another pump, and I wish I could combine them all. Like, for example, I really like the Jandy wet end, the pump pot area. I like their pump basket. I just like how the wet end feels, how the lid comes off. And if I could put one of those on a Pentair drive, that would be ideal. And not to say that the Jandy drive is no good, but I'm just combining the best parts of each pump together. And I would say that would be really good. Hayward has a really good wet end also. It's a larger area for the water to go in. And I think some features are better than others. And you have to kind of look at the overall picture. If you have automation, you want to match that pump. If you want an easy replumbing and if all the pipes are in good shape, you would just get the same pump, but a VS version of that, and then it would just go right into the unions. And if you're changing pumps and you wanted something easy to control, I think the Jacuzzi, the JVS pumps, the Hayward branded pumps would be a great choice for you because they're really easy to use. And Hayward has really done a lot to warranty that drive. I believe they give a 3 to 5 year warranty on most of their pumps, and they want you to be rest assured that the drives are not going to fail. Because if the drive were to fail on the pump, it's better just to get a whole new pump because the cost of the drive is really expensive. It's like $800, $900, $1,000, somewhere in that range. So you might as well just buy a whole new pump at that time rather than just putting the drive on the back of it. And the drive is basically the pump. And if that goes out, then the VS pump is not going to work. Let me touch a little bit about the total horsepower of the VS pump. I mentioned that if you're getting a dual voltage kind of pump and you're going from 115 volts, you don't want to get a 2.7 or 3 horsepower VS pump because then it's going to just modulate it down to like 1.8 total horsepower. And if you're replacing a single speed 1 horsepower pump, there really is no logical reason that I can think of that you would want to go from a 1 horsepower single speed pump to a 3 horsepower variable speed pump. You don't really need all that horsepower, and it may not really work well for your system anyway. A lot of sand filters work much better when there's less flow than more flow going to the sand filter, and your pool pipes might not be able to even take that kind of pressure. And that's one reason why I'm really partial to the Pentair Superflow VS, because it's only 1.5 horsepower. It's designed for the older systems where the plumbing is 1.5 inches. And to me, that's something that you have to consider. So when you're going from a 1 horsepower pump, single speed pump, you probably want to go to 1.5 horsepower or 1.65 maximum. There's no need to go any higher than that because your pool didn't need it. That's why you have a 1 horsepower pump to begin with. If you had a 1.5 horsepower pump, yes, you can logically go to 2.7 or 3. I don't see that being a huge leap, but you can always go with a 1.65 or 1.85. It's important that you have a professional pool pro look at your system just to make sure you're getting the right size pump put in for your pool. You don't want to put an undersized VS pump in when you had a, oversized single speed pump. For example, if you had a 2 horsepower single speed pump and there was a reason for that because you had water features or the equipment was 100 feet away from the pool and you put a 1.65 VS pump in, that may not work for you. So of course have a pool pro look at your equipment and make sure you're getting the right horsepower VS pump. But a good rule of thumb is that if you have a 1 horsepower or 1.5, the 1.65 or the 1.85 horsepower would be sufficient. And you could move up to a 2.7 or 3 horsepower if you wanted to. It may not be necessary. If you had a 2 horsepower single speed pump, then going to a 2.7 or 3 horsepower sounds logical, and I would go that direction. And the total horsepower does influence the WEP number, which is the energy rating. So keep that in mind also. Let me touch briefly on a couple of the off-brand pumps so you get an idea. If you wanted to get something that's made in America, some people like to get made in America products. Waterway Plastics has a VS pump, and that would be the Power Defender, and it's a good pump made in the USA. Their wet end, I really like the Waterway wet end, and Advantage Manufacturing uses the Waterway wet end on their Portavacs and their portable vacuum systems. So that's something that you may want to consider, an American-made product. And then, of course, if you wanted to get another American-made VS pump, just launched recently, is the Aquastar Pipeline VS pump, and these are also made here in America. Not to say that something not made in America is not as good as something that's made in America. That's something for you to decide. But if you wanted to buy something with that made in the USA stamp, you would want to get a Waterway VS pump or a Aquastar VS pump. Now, one thing to also note is that most of the VS motors on these things are made by Century Motors, and they make the motors for just about all the VS pumps. They also have a Century VS motor that will retrofit an existing pump. So basically, you would take off the old pump, and then you would put on the Century V-Green VS pump, and not pump, motor on the back, sorry. So you would keep your existing wet end, or the pump pot area, just take off the old motor, and then you would put in the Century VS motor. Nidec also makes a VS motor that goes on the back of an existing pump, and the Nidec ones are made in Mexico. So if you want something that has maybe a little better quality control than something made somewhere where they can't go visit the factory, then you may want to get a Nidec. I think that's how I pronounced it wrong the first time. A VS motor that goes on the back. And to be honest with you, the motor is the pump. It's basically the heart of the system. And so if the pump area is still in good condition, you can just change out the motor on the back realistically with a Century VS motor or the Nidec VS motor. And that would be a way to upgrade to a VS pump without doing any replumbing. You would just wire it in. It takes about half an hour. And then you would have a variable speed pump. A lot of the systems also work with automation, so you can wire both of these VS motors to your automated system. Bottom line, the best VS pump for 2022 is the one that suits your needs. And I went over basically everything you want to look at when you're going to get a VS pump, and you would choose one based on that. I wouldn't say they're all the same, but I would say there's probably not a bad choice out there. And I guess I could touch briefly on the Black & Decker VS pump, which is really popular out there. That actual motor and drive on the back, actually the whole pump itself, has been rebranded. Circupool uses that same pump, and I kind of know the manufacturer of this pump. I'm not going to say it, but they do make this for the Circupool, and that's been around a lot longer than the Black & Decker version. And this one retrofits directly into the IntelliFlow footprint. So if you're looking for a drop-in VS pump that's not a Pentair, the Circupool VS pump will fit right into the IntelliFlow footprint, and so will the Black & Decker, I believe, and that's one of their marketing techniques for those two pumps. But they're kind of an off-brand pump, you would say. But nonetheless, the Black & Decker pump does have a long history behind it, because again, it's being made by the same person making the Circupool, which they were kind of more of a salt system manufacturer, but they do have that VS pump available. And again, choose the pump that's right for your situation, and don't choose a pump that has the best brochure and had the flashiest. You want to get the pump that you need for your situation. And if you want some fine tuning, I can definitely help you through an email. You can just send me a photo of your equipment, and I'll look it over and refer you to the best VS pump for your situation. You can email me at david@swimmingpoollearning.com. And if you're looking for other podcasts I recorded, you can find those on my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. On the banner, click on that podcast icon, and you'll see a drop-down menu with other podcasts. And I've done recordings with Hayward and Jandy about their VS pumps. You can find those in the search box. Just type in Jandy VS or Hayward VS, and you'll be able to get those podcast episodes pulled up there. And if you're interested in the coaching program, I have that available also at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a rest of your week, and God bless. Pool Service Pro. Open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro.